Can you drift the new DLC cars? That's the burning question I'm here to answer. This video will be testing and ranking the drifting ability of each car released as part of the GTA Criminal Enterprises DLC. Now for each car, I will test the car and evaluate any strengths and weaknesses that it has for drifting, and then give my overall opinion on the car. At the end of the video, I will rank all of the cars against each other to determine which drifts the best. Every car featured in the video is going to have the same modifications for the sake of fairness, so that will be stock brakes, maximum performance upgrades, low grip tires, and for anyone asking about stancing, none of the new DLC cars can be stanced, so that's not a factor we need to worry about. If this video is successful, I'll release follow-up episodes for each new drip feed car released as part of the update, so if you do enjoy the video, please leave a like and subscribe to stay tuned for much more GTA drifting and automotive content. Also, if you're looking for a place to drift with other people or join car meets, join our Discord server, linked down below. With all of that being said, let's get straight into the video. First up, let's have a look at the Torero XO. This car has quite a few things going for it which should make it a good drift car on paper. Its rear wheel drive has a ton of power, which makes it very slippery on low grip tires, which means sliding the back end out through corners becomes very easy with this car. As well as that, you can throw it into those corners very aggressively, which allows you to slide with huge angles. However, this car does have a few issues with it. The car can't use the clutch kick or double clutch trick, and paired with its twitchy handling makes the car very difficult to link corners together or transition into other drifts. The lack of handling control and its inability to clutch kick makes the car somewhat unpredictable. Overall, the Torero XO is definitely a fun car to throw about and power slide in. However, its drifting capabilities are limited, especially compared to some of the other cars we have in the game. Next up, we've got the Benefactor LM87. Now this car you'd think would have a hard time drifting, being a low slung track car, it's got sensitive throttle and kind of twitchy handling. However, it's actually quite a capable drift car, it surprised me. The LM87 has a decent amount going for it. It's got very high power, responsive handling and good acceleration when on low grips. So all of this allows the car to hold really smooth lines, and it's fairly easy to transition between drifts at those higher speeds. This car is also capable of all sorts of entry styles like 360 entries in that because of that responsive handling, and it allows for really good control of the car. This doesn't mean that drifting it is easy by any means. I wouldn't consider it a friendly car for beginners to try drifting with, as the car needs a lot of counter steer and very careful throttle control to prevent it from spinning out. But for those of you who are more experienced with drifting, it's 100% a good pick and you should give it a try. Moving on to the new Corsita, I have to say I'm not really impressed with this thing. Looking at its strengths, it's got a lot of power, it can use the clutch kick, it's very slippery, so you know, it should be a good car on paper. However, it's got incredibly twitchy handling when on low grips, and put that with that sensitive throttle, turns the high power into an absolute menace. The car is just incredibly unpredictable and very difficult to slide well. It will spin out with the slightest increase in throttle, and the handling is so poor on low grips that you cannot correct yourself. Just trying to drift this car is a recipe for disaster. There are too many options out there that are far less hassle and do the job much better. I wouldn't say it's worth the time. I wouldn't recommend it. Moving on to the Omnis EGT, this is a bit of a weird one. Because it's an electric car, you can't use the clutch kick and it has really limited wheel spin at the back end. So when you try to drift it, you can't use the normal drifting style for it. You need to use a different style of drifting, which is quite different to the traditional style. So drifting it normally, the car is just going to feel underpowered, you'll understeer into the corner, and it's really difficult to get that back end to kick out. So going off of that alone, you'd think it is just an awful drift car, and that's what I thought at first as well. But if you give some practice into drifting it as an electric car, the thing's actually pretty good. Sliding this thing is definitely a learning process. You need to make sure that the revs are really high coming into the corner, and you have to use almost the throttle and the handbrake at the same time to prevent the car from understeering. It does take a good bit of practice, but once you actually get the method down, this thing is pretty good. The main downside of drifting like this though is there's a lot less control in drifting it than traditional drifting. You can't really use your steering input as much to kind of correct for yourself. If you enter the corner a little bit too quickly or you mess up that entry somehow, it is going to be quite difficult to correct yourself and you're more likely to spin out. Overall, it was quite challenging to get the hang of, especially if you're not familiar with all-wheel drive drifting or electric drifting cars. It is going to be a bit weird, but it has grown on me and it's a ton of fun. Finally, let's take a look at the new Bravado Greenwood. So the Greenwood is a rear-wheel drive muscle car. It's got quite a lot of power and you can clutch kick with it. So all of this should indicate it's a pretty good drift car, but there are some things to keep in mind. First up is the weighty handling. It is a very heavy car in the corners. It just feels pretty sluggish, and that handling response makes the car a little bit difficult to drift at higher speeds in terms of transitioning into, one drift into the next. Also, this car is pretty prone to oversteer without the low grips on it because it's rear wheel drive and very high power. So when you put low grips into the equation, it massively exacerbates that. This makes the car really easy to spin out, so you have to be really careful with your throttle input, and this does make high speed drifting pretty difficult. Overall though, the car is best suited for drifting at kind of slower to medium speeds, pretty similarly to the Faction. It can definitely hold a decent line, but it is pretty prone to oversteering, and that weighty handling makes errors very hard to correct. I imagine that if the car was stanced, it would be better, but unfortunately you can't stance any of the cars from this new DLC, but overall, not a bad drift car. So now that we've had a look at all of the new cars, we've tested them, where do they stack up against each other? Fifth place out of all of them, it's got to be the Corsita. It is awful. Don't even bother trying to drift this thing. As I said, the very, very twitchy handling, the high power, and the lack of control, this thing is not fun at all. That sensitive throttle is going to send you into a wall. Don't even bother trying. Fourth place is going to be the Torero XO. Pretty decent to slide about in, but it's too hard to go ahead and link drifts together consistently that I could really call it a decent drift car. Third place, I'm going to put the Greenwood. Pretty decent drifter. Only thing is, it's pretty weighty in the corners and it is prone to oversteering. So again, you have to be really careful with that throttle to make anything work with it. Second place goes to the Omnis EGT. Yes, an electric car is actually decent at drifting. Don't get me wrong, it's a very unorthodox drifting style, but sliding it, you can hold really nice lines and it is a ton of fun. Although, if I had to ask for anything more, the control could be a little bit better on the handling side, so you can just kind of recover a little better, but it is still pretty good. And that means the best car so far out of the new Criminal Enterprises DLC, the number one spot goes to the Benefactor LM87. This car is super versatile. It's got high power, it can hold really nice lines, and it can transition super well between corners. You will need a kind of higher level of skill for drifting this car. As I said, you need to focus a lot on counter steering and that throttle input. It is definitely not for the faint of heart. However, I would highly recommend it if you've got some skill with drifting. It is a ton of fun. To improve your drifting in GTA 5, click the video here, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more. Comment down below what you thought of these cars, and do you think they're any good at drifting yourself, and if you agree or disagree with anything in this list. Thank you all very much for watching, and have yourselves a wonderful rest of your day.